audience and to our panel on STEM education, what, why, and how. We had two distinguished professors from the US, Dr. Krajcik and Dr. Lynch, and we will be talking about the scope and perhaps some foundational background of STEM education. Try to explore both the US perspective, and I know that there's a huge crowd of Turkish audience here. So I'm sure you can relate it to our own problems, our own or country's conditions, and how we can learn from the US experiences. Of course, the Turkish educational system and our needs a little bit different than the US. Turkey ranks at the bottom of the TIMSS and PISA at the achievement tests. But on the other hand, when we look at the affective domain, we are at the top of the list. So basically our students love mathematics and our students love science. Turkey was ranked in the top third of the countries in TIMSS in 2008-11 in the affective domain again. When you look at the US, the situation is not that way. So some of the interpretations of STEM education in the US may be different because of this reason. We will be asking to our experts here. Also, when we look at the number of scientists and engineers, should I speak closer or further? I don't think that. What is that? What is this?
Speak close to the microphone.
Yeah, I don't think speaking closer works. Ah, it doesn't.
You cannot hear. You cannot hear at all.
Turn that one off.
Okay. What is this? Perfect. So, no?
We haven't heard anything from you.
Seriously? He's written a doctoral dissertation, isn't it?
We
No?
heard tips and third, something about
How is this
third.
now?
Perfect.
Okay, let me talk again. Just
Yes.
repeat what I said. I was referring the differences between the two countries, Turkey and US. And my rationale was based on, especially on the affective domain, because Turkey tops the international rankings in terms of whether students like mathematics or science. It's an interesting fact because when you look at the achievement lists, we are at the very bottom of the list. We were 43rd out of 46 or 50 countries. When you look and ask our students if they like mathematics or science, they say they love it. So we should have a different problem. And we will try to relate what Dr. Lynch and Krajcik are going to talk about today and how we can learn from their work in the US. Also, when we look at the number of scientists and number of engineers in Turkey, we don't see, we don't have a need for more scientists or engineers. There's an oversupply from our universities that graduate scientists and engineers. So our rationale can also not be to increase the number of people who graduate from the STEM departments or STEM departments at the university level. Another difference that I can tell is we don't have Obama. That means we don't have a general policy or someone who tells us that we should do this. Much of our efforts for the last 4 years has been from bottom to top. We've been working with teachers and trying to increase the number of our understanding of STEM education from the classroom, and we've been hoping to influence the policymakers and politicians in the country. Another difference I can tell is that we don't have a centralized, we have a strict centralized curriculum. Our teachers are told what to do, when to do, and how to do. There is no such thing in the US, although there are some efforts in mathematics which we call the Common Core, and in the science, the next generation science standards. So we will also would like to learn more about those experiences in the US. So the way that I like to proceed is to ask our experts 3 questions. First, how they define STEM education, what the STEM education is. And second is why do we need STEM education, and how do you do those STEM education practices in the US. And after each question, I'd like to give you the opportunity to ask your own questions and then proceed like this. Dr. Lynch, would you like to share your opinion about what STEM education is according to you?
Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Good morning. First of all, I guess I would like to say that, when we're talking about comparisons between countries, the U.S. Is not exactly at the top of international tests in terms of PISA. We stand firmly in about the 29th or 30th place, and we haven't budged much, no matter what we've tried to do over the last 20 years. So, in fairness, we should mention that at the beginning. And we don't produce nearly enough engineers and scientists as we'd like to produce, but even more important, we aren't producing people with the technology skills for entry-level positions, and that's one of the things we know for sure. So you don't have to have a doctorate in engineering or physics or mathematics to find good, meaningful jobs and careers in the United States. It can be a much lower level kind of preparation, but that nonetheless would result in really good work. And I think that's really important. We know that for sure. We also know that the distribution of where the talent is, very often on both coasts, you find large amounts of people well educated in STEM, but it's a big country, and it's not well distributed in the places where you need the STEM talent. And especially in some areas of the United States, there's been an economic downturn, and it needs to change around. And they're looking for STEM talent and STEM education in response to business and industry's demands. So that's grassroots. You were talking about bottom-up. It really is a bottom-up kind of effort in the U.S. And while President Obama has used his position to say that we need more science and math, in truth, not one dime, I don't think, has come from the federal budget to fund STEM education. So it never got appropriated. He wanted the money, but the money comes from Congress. Our Congress is good one. Maybe more politics than you want to hear about. But so it's way more complicated. But I think that if in Turkey and the United States that the effort is coming from the grassroots, coming from the bottom up, that's a really, really good thing. It probably allows for more innovation and creativity for what STEM could do. So now, as far as definitions, I guess the term was coined about maybe 20 years ago in the United States. It started out not as STEM, but as SMET. SMET. That doesn't sound very good, right? And so Rita Colwell, who's then director of the National Science Foundation, changed the acronym to STEM. And the National Science Foundation, and most people continue to use it as an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Now, more recently, I think there's been some agreement that what STEM really needs to be is an integration of the disciplines. Okay, so it's moved from the individual disciplines, separate but important, to effort to integrate both in practice as well as in education. Now, what about STEM education? Less agreement about that. I don't think anybody has a good definition of it or a single definition, and I think that's intentional. So you should think about that. Why won't people define it? And I think the answer might be because it's too new to put it in a small box and to say this is it. It's really kind of a new idea, both in terms of the way knowledge is created, as well as the way education occurs. Now, I'm a researcher, so we need to have some kind of definition. And so we've borrowed one from a couple of researchers. And so this is the one we use. I'll read it slowly. I like this one. It works for us. But we have to know what we're talking about, so that's why we've chosen it. It's an interdisciplinary approach to learning where rigorous academic concepts are coupled with real-world lessons as students apply science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in contexts that make connections between school, community, work, and the global enterprise. Big definition, but I think you can see what's in there. It's interdisciplinary, and it's connected to the community and to the global enterprise. Another way of putting it, it's kind of a constructivist kind of thing, right? It's learning through understanding what's going on in your environment and bringing that up.
Thank you. So what I hear from your definition is it has to be interdisciplinary, and you also emphasize the word rigor. That means that it is actually based on mathematics and science, and teaching those rigors, talking them about in a rigorous term.
Right, because I think another thing, because it's a catchword in the United States, and I think people use it very loosely, sometimes it's such a loose term that there is no rigor. I mean, for those of us in the room who have a background in science or mathematics or in technology, you want some rigor behind it. You just don't want a little lesson that somebody used last year to be recycled and called STEM this year. You want some real substance to it.
So although the definition is intentionally not well defined, we want the mathematics and science to be well defined. Perhaps it wasn't that important, so I skipped that part. So, Dr. Krajcik, how would you define STEM education? And would you agree with Dr. Lynch on the interdisciplinary links to community, and of course to the rigor component?
Hi, first of all, I'd like to say I'm really pleased to be here and to share what I know about STEM education with you, and hopefully also to learn from you as well. Because I think helping our kids understand science and technology, engineering and mathematics is not necessarily a national problem, but it's a global problem. If we're really going to help our world be sustainable and the world exist as we know it today, it's not just one country that's going to have to wrestle with helping our students be knowledgeable in STEM. It's going to have to be a worldwide effort. So anyways, I'm really pleased to be here and to both share my knowledge with you and also learn with you. As many of you know, I'm a science educator. My background is actually in chemistry. I've studied how kids learn science throughout my entire career. But when I think about STEM, if we're really going to make it, if you think about the problems that exist both within the world, many of them are interdisciplinary. The only way we're really going to solve challenging problems is not necessarily have a narrow focus on one discipline, but actually to have a broad focus on many disciplines, but at the same time being able to go deep. So when I listen to Professor Lynch's definition of STEM as one that's interdisciplinary, I would agree with that. That if we want to think of what STEM is, we want to think about the people being able to simultaneously use both ideas that come from science, ideas that come from mathematics, and ideas that come from engineering and technology, really to solve problems that exist in our world. And that's a challenge, that ability to be able to simultaneously apply those ideas from diverse areas is really a challenging effort. I don't think we have really good models within education of how to do it. I would also say that there is a fear. I mean, why I can say the problems that exist are interdisciplinary, and why I can say I think we want to push towards interdisciplinary knowledge. At the same time, we have to make sure that we have some depth of understanding in some areas. But we want to have understanding across, we also have to go in depth, because we don't want to necessarily be shallow, which we really don't then have the depth of knowledge to solve anything. And I think those are issues that are going to have to get worked out as we move forward.
Thank you very much. So at this point, I would like to ask the audience if they have any questions related to the definition of STEM education. Okay, so, all right, so I don't know how that works. Thank you, Dr. Clark.
See, this is an example of STEM education, learning how to turn on a microphone. It's interdisciplinary.
Hello, welcome. I would like to say first of all. Should the definition include all these disciplines at the same time? I mean, when we talk about STEM, should we, the definition should include all these 4 disciplines all in once. I mean, I guess.
That's a question that many of the Turkish teachers ask me during the last year. Do we have to integrate all 4 disciplines, or can
That's
it
right.
be
That's right.
pairs of disciplines? How do we decide on that?
That's
You know, I think that's a great question. I'm involved in a project right now. Oh, I'm sorry. I think that's a great question, and I'm involved in a project right now in which we're trying to integrate mathematics and with science, along with English language learning. Put that on the side for a second. But also getting them involved in engineering problems. And it's a real challenge. So to think interdisciplinary is a challenge. But if we don't start young and we don't start to try to apply ideas, then I don't think we're ever going to get there. And I actually think which disciplines we integrate really depends on what the problem is. Some problems might just call for the integration of mathematics with the integration of science. Others may call, if for instance I'm explaining a phenomena, I might not need to get involved in engineering. On the other hand, if the question results is more of how can I improve something, then I'm probably going to be applying both science ideas as well as engineering ideas, thinking about design and perhaps mathematics. So it really depends on what the problem is. What I would argue that we should do, or what I would speculate what we should do, is try to think of problems that are very meaningful to children and to learners that integrate different disciplines, and to make sure that in our curriculum sequence that we engage kids at different times using engineering ideas and science ideas, etc. What I'm truly fearful of is often sometimes I see people getting involved in very interesting engineering ideas, but the science becomes in the background. And I don't want the science to become trivialized, nor do I want to see the engineering become trivialized, nor the mathematics to become trivialized. So I think it's an interesting problem, and I think what we should truly try to do in our classrooms is think of situations that really can engage kids in the simultaneous use of different disciplines. By the way, the challenge isn't necessarily just integrating STEM, mathematics, engineering, and technology. The challenge is also integrating the different science disciplines. And that's where it really becomes complex. So if you pick really interesting problems, you're not only just dealing with one discipline in science, you're probably dealing with several disciplines in science. So you not only have to integrate engineering ideas, you also have to integrate the different science disciplines.
So I'd like to go at it a little differently. We have studied a set of really high-functioning STEM schools in the United States, and one of them is Maynard and Tech High. Actually, we have submitted an article on Maynard to your journal, journal affiliated with this conference. I hope that it does well, it's reviewed well. But within Maynard, they're doing interdisciplinary science, math, technology, and engineering. Now, how do they do it? Now, this is a really practical answer. So, for instance, what they've done is they've been able to team 2 teachers of 2 different disciplines to team teach a class for double the amount of time. So you might take an algebra teacher and a chemistry teacher. and team them up in a class. And so you've got them there all the time, and they're planning the projects together, and they're supporting one another. So they aren't reaching for disciplines, I see heads nodding, they aren't reaching for disciplines that they couldn't possibly know well. I can think of another class that's engineering and physics. And I was in that class earlier this year, and they've converted something like an old garage, it's almost like an airplane hangar, into this wonderful workshop. And so, there's big power machines and tools, and then on the other side, there's classroom desks and laptops and computers. So in a particular class I was looking at, it was projectile motion. So they were teaching projectile motion, as a good physics teacher would teach projectile motion, but in the meantime, they've got kids using these tools to build any number of things that fire projectiles, whether they were cannons or trebuchets or whatever it was, and they've got a good space to do it in. So as the kids are actually making these things and engineering the products, they, for instance, have a computer simulation on the kinds of data that you'd like ideally to get, balanced with, the actual physical manipulation. So that's a good how-to, right? I mean, when you've got an engineering teacher and a physics teacher working together. In that same school, what was really amazing is some of the English classes and the history classes were combined. So I saw an ancient history class combined with a writing class. And they were doing things like this. They were sending kids off to a Renaissance festival. I guess that wasn't ancient history, it was middle history, right? And the kids had to collect data on their cell phones on the different uses of technology in the production of weaponry, drama, cooking devices. I mean, so they're really tuned into the technology as they're exploring the humanities. So that didn't happen overnight. That's taken about 8 years to develop, but that whole school is tuned in. The art teacher is thrilled to be there because she's got kids who can do engineering design as they approach the art projects. So I think I'm all about that interdisciplinarity, but I don't think it's something that you just dream up overnight. It's going to take time for teachers to work together and figure it out.
So in the definition, it looks like we have an interdisciplinary or a transdisciplinary approach that we should still work on as the people who produce knowledge on this case. I also hear using STEM as a context and also using it to solve a problem, a real life problem in your approach. So the second question that I'd like to pose to our experts is, why should we do it? Is it because policymakers need more science teachers or math teachers, and or is it something else? Is there any philosophical or epistemological foundation or ontological foundation of integrating those four disciplines in the classroom? Is it something that we just believe, or is there any reason, rationale that we have to do this? Would you like to start, Dr. Krajcik?
So, from a science education perspective, I really believe it's important to educate all our students with respect to having usable knowledge of science and mathematics and engineering and technology. I actually have a hard time putting in technology because I can't even imagine how you live today without technology. It's such a core part of us that not including it seems almost impossible. I wouldn't even know how to design anything without including technology. So I seldom don't use the term because it just seems so much part of what today is that I don't do it. But so anyway, so for me, all children today need to have a strong, solid basis of science, engineering, and technology. Not because there's a policy out there, but because they actually need it to live in the world in which we live today. Children are going to constantly be faced with dilemmas. There was recently in the United States a report put out by our Department of Health that it's okay to eat food that's genetically modified. Now that's a nice claim, and it comes from an authority, but I would really like to know the evidence. What's the evidence that our Department of Health is claiming that it's okay to eat genetically modified food? In fact, 25 years ago, they told me it was okay to eat margarine. In fact, they recommended I eat margarine over butter. And only to find out 24 years later that it was better to eat butter than margarine. So I don't know why I should believe them unless they tell me what the evidence is. And I think all our children, everybody in school, K through 12, K through 16, has to have the knowledge to evaluate evidence. And to me, that's just critical. So for personal usage, and to understand the world, to understand problems that they're going to face, they need to have deep, usable knowledge of science ideas. Now, it's also the case that there's good jobs out there with the use of science, technology, and engineering. In fact, it's not the case in most places. I don't know about Turkey. What I can say in the United States, often people say, well, there's no jobs. In fact, there are lots of jobs. What it is our children aren't trained, aren't prepared educationally to use those jobs because they don't have the underlying mathematical knowledge, they don't have the underlying science knowledge, and they don't have the underlying engineering knowledge. So from a personal perspective, I think it's critical to have a deep understanding of stuff. From going out in the world and trying to get a job that you can live a decent life, I think is really critical. So that's what I would argue. So there's policies that are out there, but I think there's other reasons as well.
How about integrating the subject? What is the reason why we need to integrate them?
Can I go back a little bit? All right, so Joe's named two things, and I couldn't agree more. Scientific literacy and economic needs. Scientific literacy and economic needs. I'd like to add two more things.
I left that just for you.
In the United States, and I think in most countries, and I'll talk a little bit about this more tomorrow, we've got gaps in income and social mobility. And very often the students who have access to the best educations are not the students who should be getting access to good science, math, or if you will, STEM education. So at least in the US, part of what's driving it is equity issues. And if you keep on teaching the way you've been teaching for the last 40 years and looking at those achievement gaps and the opportunity to learn gaps and then the outcome gaps, nothing has changed. In fact, it's gotten worse. Now, there's a belief that with STEM education that you can draw new kids in and try to close those gaps. So we don't know that that's going to happen, but I'm optimistic. So that's the third reason. Now, I think there's a fourth reason, and I think it's underlying everything that everybody in this room knows. And that is that, does it seem to you that today's students learn differently than the way we learned? I mean, no. You're saying no? Well, from what I'm seeing, they really are approaching learning differently. By that I mean what they tune into, how they tune into it, the use of technology, the access to the internet. There's something going on there that I think you have to respond to. I'll tell a quick story. Part of our study involved going in and following kids through a school day. We called it a day in the life, okay? And we took a pair of schools. And one school was a traditional school, and we literally followed a kid from the moment she got in the front door of school to the moment she left. And we went to every class, and we observed classes, and we took notes, and we went to lunch, and we interviewed the parents, and we interviewed the teachers, and we interviewed the kid. We just tried to feel how that kid might be experiencing STEM. And then we compared it to a similar student in a demographically matched STEM high school, okay? All right. You go through that traditional school experience, and at the end of the day, I was totally exhausted. I'd never listened so much in my life. It seemed like, it was like it was like you were listening and taking notes. kids were tuning in and out, you see people's heads going down and jerking off, and jerking back up, you know, they're waking up. It was exhausting, and it went on for like 7 hours. Now in the STEM school, where they're doing active learning and group learning and project-based learning and interdisciplinary learning, I was exhausted at the end of the day too, but in a completely different way. I was excited, I was interested in what I was doing, I was being challenged, I had things I wanted to talk more about. So I really think that there's something that's going on in the 21st century. Technology has something to do with it, the media has something to do with it, social interactions have something to do with it. Maybe kids always learn that way, but we haven't seen it in the United States in a long time. I think something's changing, and I would say that maybe STEM education is catching the kind of the leading edge of it, but it might represent a change in how we do school in general as we move forward in the 21st century.
So can I just add something, please?
So Sharon mentioned a really important part, and that's equity in the United States. And certainly all kids having equal access and high quality education is really critical. One of the issues that exists in the United States is kids' fluency in mathematics. This actually goes also to Sharon's second point about kids learning differently. One of the things I can say very clearly, and you have to examine yourself as well. One of the reasons I'm sitting here today is because I can think mathematically. And what we've failed to do, probably over the last several generations, is help kids think mathematically. In fact, in science education, we almost abandoned mathematical thinking. And the reason why is because we were at one point, kids were learning things by rote memorization and solving problems rotely. So they memorized F equals m mass times acceleration, and then they would just simply solve a problem trying to apply that formula. Or in chemistry, we teach kids all sorts of fancy tricks, how to solve problems, stoichiometry problems, never understanding the underlying mathematics that goes beyond, that happens actually when kids do stoichiometry. So we abandoned that. We said, oh, kids have to understand qualitative ideas first before we can get into mathematics. And I think that was a mistake. I think we've lost a generation of children, several generations of children, who don't think mathematically. Now, I'm not saying rote, right? I think there's a problem. Memorizing things rotely doesn't mean anything. It's really understanding mathematics, really being able to apply mathematics in the context. So that's the science and mathematics part, right? That is just so critical. And I know part of the work that I do nowadays in higher education, and many children, many students who graduated from high school, somewhat successfully, they got into a fairly good university, Michigan State University. They can't go on in science because they lack conceptual understanding of mathematics. They want to go into various disciplines of science, being a veterinary scientist, being in agriculture, all those disciplines actually use applied mathematics. And we have to help our kids, and this is one of the reasons why I think STEM education is so important, because we can actually use those areas where kids can actually apply the science, the mathematics, in the attempt to try to solve some science or engineering problem. And that's that integration together that becomes so important. I'm going to warn us, though, not to do the rote memorization. Kids, you think back to yourself. I bet you all hate, except for my strange chemists who are in the background like me, all of you hate stoichiometry. You thought it was miserable, you solved those problems, and you didn't have a clue about why you were understanding them. And that's the way we teach chemistry in high school. That's totally detrimental to helping kids learn. But at the same time, stoichiometry underlines a very important idea in chemistry, the idea of conservation of math. And so what we really want to do is help kids think mathematically as they go about solving these issues in chemistry. And that's the application of both science or chemistry ideas along with the mathematics.
Excellent remarks. I'd like to just emphasize one thing. When I was investigating and looking through the new science curriculum in Turkey, it's a PDF file, so I control F and I wrote mathematics. and it appears 4 times. And it says the student doesn't use mathematics when learning F equals MA. The student doesn't do calculations doing this. The student doesn't do mathematics doing that. It appears 4 times just to exclude mathematics in the new science curriculum.
You know, if you think about it, I know this, the reason why we could go on in science, or at least the reason I could go on, the reason I could go on for my PhD, is because I could think so mathematically. Even very simple relationships like density, right? Density is a straight line mathematical equation, but most kids don't get that. They memorize density equals mass over volume. They memorize it rather than understanding it. It's actually a mathematical relationship. And that's, we have to help them understand those mathematical relationships.
Thank you. So is there any question about the reasons why we should integrate STEM, why we should do STEM education in Turkey or in US or in any other country?
Or additions.
Or additions, before we proceed to our last question. Yes, please.
I have questions about STEM. What do you think, what is the best age for this starting STEM?
I think that's a terrific, excuse me. I think that's a terrific question. It was, at what age should you start STEM? At what age? I think, you know, it would seem that children, babies, infants, you know, learn through manipulation of objects, right? They learn through interactions with the world. It seems to me that there's no right age at which to start. What I worry about in the US is there's a tendency towards STEM elementary schools, STEM-focused schools, themed schools. I worry about the age at which it's too early to specialize. Does that make sense? So it seems to me that developmentally it would be a healthy thing for all kids at the earliest age possible at, you know, at the right developmental levels. But I wouldn't want to cut people off from other kinds of endeavors by specializing exclusively at too early a level.
So I'm currently involved in a project funded by the George Lucas Foundation to create instructional materials for students at the elementary grades. And our proposal is actually to do it interdisciplinary. So we have many interdisciplinary units where we're both integrating the science, but also mathematics and also engineering. In fact, they're also using technology as a vehicle as well. So we're doing all 4. I don't think we ever called it STEM, but we are integrating mathematics, engineering, and technology. One example, a 3rd grade unit that we have is how can I build a better toy? Here the kids are involved in beginning ideas about force and motion. They're making measurements of how fast their toy can move, and graphing them, I guess they're bar graphs. So they're doing measurements. But they're also designing how can I make my toy better. And so they're beginning to think about design. Now the design process is actually really different. Often in science, we've ignored that. We've ignored how can I do this thing better? What constraints do I have? And so getting kids, at least from my perspective, getting kids involved in the design process early is actually quite valuable and interesting because they develop a new way of thinking about a problem they have and how might they solve that problem within the constraints that they actually have. So in my work, some of the work I'm doing right now, we're actually doing it in elementary classroom. I would agree with Sharon that I wouldn't want them to do that all day. I tend to love music, I tend to love art. I certainly want, and I love to read good novels, so I certainly don't want to prevent people from learning those other wonderful multidisciplinary skills as well. But I think getting kids involved in using mathematics along with science early on, as well as thinking from an engineering perspective, is very valuable. We're actually using a tool where they're actually creating models where they can see the models change over time. So it's like a little flip book, you know? Remember as a little kid, think about, you can, a sheet of paper is where you can flip them and you can see something move, where they're actually creating that on the computer, where they create one step, and they can see the thing animate over time. So in fact, they're applying at the 3rd grade level all 3 of the disciplines.
So I'd like to build on that, you know, because we haven't talked about teachers yet, have we? We really haven't talked about teachers. And, you know, as soon as you start thinking about what the best age is to start teaching STEM, you can imagine what the best age to do it badly, right? I mean, you know, what would you do that you wouldn't want to do? Especially at the elementary school level, when often, at least in the US, elementary school teachers are generalists. They often have majored in social studies or English language arts. I met somebody here, a Turkish elementary school STEM specialist. It was really exciting to meet somebody who had that specialization. They're fairly rare in the US. So very often what's happened is science has not been taught much in the elementary school at all. Math has been taught because it's been tested. And it's questionable whether any of it is often taught very well. And what I think Joe brings to the field that's really, really important is Joe builds curriculum units that helps people, teachers, understand how it might be done. We need models like that. And he builds those models. He's been doing it, you know, with his research groups for, I don't know, what, 10 or 15 years at least. So it's good that there's models. But that's not going to cover the whole curriculum, right? There aren't enough Joes out there. There are probably some Turkish Joes or, that are doing lots of these things as well. And, you know, through informal science and math education, we've gotten some other ideas. But we don't have enough models in the curriculum. So now you have to turn to thinking about how you prepare teachers in ways that teachers are excited and kind of get it, but that you can't expect the world out of let's say, a 2nd grade teacher, you know, to become a STEM expert right away. Now, one of the things that we've been seeing, and it was in the initial definition that I gave, and it could be easy to gloss over this, but one of the things we're seeing is that the teachers in these STEM schools that we're working with are getting more and more used to learning STEM by bringing the community into the school. So if you're an elementary school teacher and you have your curriculum, I mean, I think the encouraging of working with people in the community that are doing related things. So if you're teaching the life science unit, you know, maybe there's a science museum, maybe there's people who work with waste management. I mean, it's hard to come up with the specific examples, but the problem is we've got these walls in the schools right now. And we've got STEM experts out there, and they aren't getting into the schools, and the kids aren't getting out of the schools into the environments where they can really learn. It happens in informal education, but it doesn't happen enough, I think, in our K through 12 system. So there's going to have to be a long, gradual process of professional development. I heard here yesterday, I heard the message that the universities are going to do this, and the universities have a tremendous role in teacher preparation and professional development. But I don't think they're going to reach all the teachers in any country. I think there's going to have to be more of a willingness to get people who are in the fields into the schools and vice versa.
Thank you very, very much. Now, I'd like to talk about the practices. I'm sorry, yes, question, yes.
One of the reasons you presented of using STEM is that people use novel technologies. Does it mean that STEM or technology education is only novel technology education? Have you understand? No.
Let me just tell what I understood. Does it always have to be new technology when we include innovative technology? Is that what you're asking?
one of the reason.
Is that a reason that the technology is advancing?
One of the reasons
Dr. Lynch?
told is, for using STEM is the fact that people use a lot normal technologies, computer and does it mean that technology education is only to show people how computer.
Okay, so I'll go back to an example. You know, what we're seeing now is technology is providing teachers with the ability, and schools with the ability, not just teachers, and students and their families with the ability to do things that they couldn't do before. So here's 3 different ways technology can be used in schools, and you probably would add to them. But for one thing, you have new learning platforms. Probably everybody here works with some kind of learning platform where you post your assignments, students can post the responses, grades get posted, there's chat rooms, there's sharing. So everybody knows those learning platforms. Well, in some of the STEM schools now, the learning platforms are making things possible that just, it probably wouldn't have been possible. Like if you're doing project-based learning a lot, and the kids are working in 3-week units, and you've got those projects changing in all the classes, how do you keep track of that? You couldn't keep track of it, it would drive everyone crazy. But with these technology platforms, kids can communicate with one another in their groups, the teacher can keep track, the kids can communicate with the teacher, sometimes they can communicate outside of school to keep things going. So these new technology platforms for STEM are just making things possible that we thought about 30 years ago, and I could go on more about things that are possible now that we just couldn't do, although we had the idea to do it 30 years ago. So that's one thing. It's a way of managing information and data. It's a way for parents to understand how their kids are doing, whether they need help, whether they need extra challenges. The second way the technology is used is a learning tool. And we talked about computer simulations, and we've seen some really great presentations here already where it's a tool for understanding mathematics and visualization. Another way the technology is being used is kids go to the internet. They want to learn about something, as we all know. They're quick on those iPhones, right? I saw somebody's presentation about how much time they spend on Google and using that kind of information. So it's certainly a source of information, and it doesn't stop with the teacher. It's not the teacher standing up in front of them, limiting what a kid can know to what the teacher knows. But here's the other thing, and I think this is really exciting. Students are beginning to use technologies for production, for creativity, for demonstrating what they know and what they can do in really, really creative ways. So if you go back to those quotes from people from business and industry that want those 21st century skills, that's really what they're learning, and what they're looking for. They're looking for people who can create, who can build, who can use information well, who know how to work in groups. Social media is facilitating that. So it really is kind of a new environment out there.
Thank you very much. So my last question is about your expertise, especially with the end users of the next generation science standards. How did you manage to integrate engineering into the science curricula? Are you happy with the outcome? What are some of the reactions or criticisms about the new curriculum?
So just to give you a little background, I was the lead writer on the physical science core ideas for the framework for K-12 science education. That publication actually served as a foundation for the next generation of science standards in the United States, of which I was the lead writer for the physical science standards, as well on the leadership team of the next generation of science standards. So I do come with a bit of a background in this area. There's a couple of really exciting aspects about the framework. One of them is that they're focused around disciplinary core ideas. This is a little bit, and there is a little there's a saying that we had on the writing teams that if you could Google it, it wasn't a disciplinary core idea. And what does that mean? It means that core ideas are big ideas that develop over time, and you just can't pick up your iPhone and read about it. That's not how you develop conceptual understanding. You might be able to find some information, but you don't develop deep conceptual understanding of really challenging ideas like natural selection, like genetics, like energy, like chemical reactions, by picking up your iPhone and reading about it. Those are challenging, deep concepts that really take a long time for kids to develop over time. Those are disciplinary ideas. But the framework went much farther than that. They also said that kids have to engage in scientific practices, scientific and engineering practices, not just science practices, but scientific and engineering practices, like designing models. If you're in science, you're designing models to represent a phenomena. If you're in engineering, you're designing a model to represent how you're going to solve the problem. It's a prototype of what the problem, how you're going to solve that problem. The other one that they had is this notion of cross-cutting concepts, which is ideas that cut across the discipline, but in many respects act as lenses to allow you to examine phenomena or problems in different ways. Now, if that's as far as NGSS went, and as the framework went, it would have been okay, but the framework actually went much farther. What the framework says, and what NGSS says, is that those three dimensions, disciplinary core ideas, cross-cutting concept, and scientific and engineering practices, have to work together to support kids in explaining phenomena, making sense of phenomena, or designing solutions to problems. That's a totally different way of thinking about what we do in instruction. So in that respect, I'm extremely pleased about what the framework at NGSS has to contribute to thinking about education, both in the United States and I hope globally as well. Because often, as a teacher, I taught high school teaching, high school science, high school chemistry for 8 years. And my goal was to teach science concepts. I wanted my kids to leave my room understanding oxidation. I wanted my kids to leave my room knowing how to balance equations. And it's changed nowadays. Nowadays, that's not the goal. The goal is for kids to use ideas to make sense of phenomena or design solutions to problems. So if you look at the next generation of science standards, you will see standards that are framed as knowledge and use. They're an integration of a scientific or engineering practice, a disciplinary core idea, and a cross-cutting concept. And kids are supposed to use that at the end of instruction to be able to solve a problem or make sense of a phenomenon. Again, I'm very excited about that as well. Now, for the first time in our nation, engineering actually ended up being one of those core ideas. It's a beginning point. I talked to some engineers and they would like to see it changed a little bit different. But so there are a couple of engineers, we as design teams, we were able to pick 4 big ideas. And for some reason, engineering only picked 2. I don't know why, but they only picked 2. So I think it's a beginning point. I know that many of our teachers in our country, in the United States, are somewhat fearful because they don't know how to teach engineering, right? They don't, and how do you integrate it within your classroom? So I think it's a very exciting time, by the way, about how do we create these curricula that we are first talking about that are interdisciplinary. So I think it's a very exciting time, but it's new territory. And anytime you have new territory, you're not exactly sure where you're going, and it's always some fears about how it will end up. So I think we're in a very exciting time. At the same time, we have lots of challenges that are in front of us.
Thank you. Yeah. So if the STEM inclusive schools, Dr. Lynch, do you see practices similar to what NGSS is trying to achieve? Are the teachers ready? Do they have the necessary pedagogical content knowledge to teach science and, of course, engineering or any other thing that the NGSS wants the teachers to teach?
Well, NGSS is a really ambitious set of standards, and it's, you know, it's the push underneath the whole set of changes I think we want in education. It's very ambitious. It's pushing everyone to think in this way. I think the pull is coming from these new ideas in STEM, because we aren't quite exactly sure how we're going to execute it. And with STEM, because it's so new, it gives you some room to be innovative and creative. With this, again, we studied a set of inclusive STEM schools. These are schools that are intentionally not schools for gifted and talented children, but open enrollment, lottery admission schools that have a broad range of kids who attend them, okay? So it's a broad range of the population. And in these schools, what we're getting is not only high standardized test scores, not off the charts, but good, strong standardized test scores, but other indicators. Indicators like 100% high school graduation rates in places where there's a 50% high school dropout rate. There's a 100% virtually college admission rate in places where kids don't finish high school at all. And so the indicators are really, really strong. With regard to the teachers, you know, what they're doing is they're hiring teachers who want to be in an innovative environment that's mission-driven and collaborative. I'll say that again. They're hiring teachers who want to be in a mission-driven environment that's highly collaborative. So they aren't miracle teachers, but they all have good, strong, disciplinary content knowledge in STEM. This is high school level now. And there's quite a strong sprinkling of people who've come to teaching as a second career. So they've come from business and industry. So you've had practicing engineers who've become teachers and research scientists. So it's not the entire population, but there's about maybe a third. So there's lots of good experience out in the world before teaching. But the other part of that is because this STEM notion is a new idea, they're willing to be collaborative. The schools are small, they're nimble, they're able to change quickly. So they get an idea, they try something out, they work together, they're data-driven, they look, did that work or not? Yes, it worked, good, we'll use that more. No, it didn't work, how are we going to improve it? So in answer to the question about how these teachers are prepared, they're going to be a new kind of person who's willing to take those kinds of risks in a new kind of school. And how that translates to our larger comprehensive schools, I don't know yet. But again, it's the pull. The push is coming from the standards, and I guess we have yet to see how the standards are going to play out, the national next generation science standards. But that group of people in the U.S. were smart because they didn't push the assessments. They didn't push the big, high stakes accountability. They're letting it develop more slowly, so teachers and students and families aren't frightened of the consequences. It's going to take, I'm sure, 10 or 15 years at least to have those standards realized. Maybe Joe disagrees, I don't know.
Let me give you an example, by the way, of one of these standards. So the standards say something like, construct a model about something, right? Put your discipline in there. Write a scientific explanation. Argue from evidence. Now, if you think about your own education, think about the first time you ever created a model. Not used a model, someone else's model. Your own model in order to provide a causal explanation why something happened. Now, I don't know about you, but the first time I did it was when I was a graduate student. Right? It's just not something we typically do. And yet the next generation science standards are pushing kids to construct models based on evidence in order to be able to explain phenomena or design a solution to a problem. It's a very different way of thinking. It's a very different way of thinking about argue from evidence. What's your evidence to really support your claim? So when we ask the question, are teachers prepared to teach in that manner? The answer is no. It's pretty simple. It's not the way most people were educated. Is it the way people should be educated? Well, I would argue absolutely yes. And I think the data is pretty strong that it should be. So we have some work in front of us. I totally agree with Sharon's comment that it's 10 years. It might be 15 years, right? The rolling out of the framework and the next generation science standards isn't something that's going to happen in the United States within the next 1 year. It's going to be a process across 5, 10, 15 years. And it's once it stays there continuously, that we'll have some good answers about, does this kind of education really work or not work?
Many times we appreciate the patience in the US. The curriculum in Turkey changes every 3-4 years. It's a general problem for us to wait. So we'll see how it is going to help us. So any questions from the teachers, researchers about the practices, STEM practices, engineering and science practices that you would like to ask to Dr. Lynch and Dr. Krajcik? Yes, please, Roger. No, through the microphone.
Scientific practices is an important issue in STEM education. You know, scientific practices, engineering practices. Are you happy with the way that scientific practice is defined in NGSS? Do you think is it comprehensive enough? Is it clear enough? So my question, the focus of my question is scientific practices and how we define it.
So one of the things I'll start off by saying is that the next generation of science standards are what kids can be assessed on. It doesn't tell us necessarily what should happen in classrooms. So the goal should be that we're always building towards one of the standards. They're called performance expectations because they're specified in terms of the performance kids construct. So when you look at the standards themselves, there's a limited set. So am I happy with that limited set? The answer would be no. But that's what kids can get assessed on, right? It's not what we should be doing in our classroom. So what it does is it gives me a vision of what I should be doing in my classroom. So if indeed the standard is related to kids arguing for evidence, I know that in my classroom I have to build up to that. But in building up to that, I could get kids engaged, I have to get kids engaged in analyzing data. I have to get kids engaged perhaps in constructing an explanation or constructing a model. So from an instructional standpoint, the next generation of science standards offers lots of opportunities for kids to engage both in scientific practices as well as in engineering practices as they build their knowledge in order to meet that standard. So instructional-wise, we have lots to do. And as far as helping kids meet those performance expectations.
Yes, Margaret.
Hello. I'm a science teacher at the private school in Istanbul. I work with small kids.
You need a microphone, I think.
I don't think so.
Okay. Keep talking like that. You don't.
Yeah, I can.
He's a teacher.
I can speak louder. My question concerns